Good morning, folks, and welcome back to the Modern Explorers Guild Workbench. I'm Drew, and today we're going to be working on Archaon the Everchosen, the very large HQ model for Warhammer, Age of Sigmar. This model has been put together, and it's been put together in assemblies. And so right now you're looking at Archaon himself. He's going to be riding on quite a large monster that has 3 heads. And these were done with a combination of airbrushing and with rattle cans. And so you can see each one of the heads I have sprayed with Chaos Black. Then I came back over with a Zenithal of Vallejo Gray. And then I came back over with several other paints from Vallejo because I had that available to me to use in my airbrush. So I did a combination of sprays and airbrush on these guys. And I've put in roughly 8 hours of work before we've gotten here. It took about 5 hours to put him together. And then it took probably another hour and a half to, or maybe even 2 hours or so, to spray everything up, get everything primed. You can see I have his sword here as a sub-assembly as well. And finally the shield. The giant monster itself is already sitting on a base, and it is too large for me to stick on the camera as I have it set up. And so you'll see that a bit later, but because I don't want to have to reset up the way the camera's focused and the way everything is lit, just to show you that one model, we're going to keep that on the back burner for now, and you'll see that when it comes up. But I have him here, Archaon the Everchosen, on this plinth here, and he's going to get ready for some paint. Now, the pieces we're going to be working on today are Archaon, his shield, and his sword. The cape will be for another day. He's going to have black armor. And black armor is particularly difficult to work with because you would like for it to read as something that's black and shiny and not as something that is kind of a strange gray color after you add all of your highlights. And so making sure you keep an appropriate amount of black on the armor is very important. So without further ado, we are going to get started painting him here. And he has been zenithaled. And the reason I did this is to help me see where the darkest areas are going to be on him. And to start off, we're going to strengthen those areas with some black by scale 75. So I'm going to go ahead and get this scale 75 black on my palette here. I am using a wet palette today. And we're going to start filling in the shadows here. So we're going to work from the darkest to the lightest on this model. I will actually be using today my quite old Citadel standard brush from back when I was a child. So we're going to give this a roll again and see how it works, see if it works as well as I remember. But we are going to be using this to block in our shadows. So now that my paint is on my palette, I'm going to pull a little bit this out, get a little water on my palette so that this black will flow. And here I'm just going to follow the work that was already done by my Zenithal. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to fill in the darker spots here. So any place that really should be in shadow, I'm going to make sure is actually quite dark. And then the places that are going to be lighter, I'm going to leave alone in this process. And so this is going to take a little while here, but of course this is mostly a paint along. So you're here for the journey. Hopefully I'm able to teach a little bit along the way from my experiences. But we're just going to keep on following the Zenithal here, going in and finding those places that are the darkest and painting those. Now if we do get a little bit of paint in places that we shouldn't, that's okay. We're going to be painting this entire model. This is really, the stuff that's on here is really just to help guide. And so that's going to be something that just takes it really is just to handhold here. And it's also for you. It really helps me, but it also helps you to see where it is I'm about to be painting. And you can use this process during your own painting. Go ahead and grab a little bit more water here. Keep this black flowing well. I'm going to come under here in this darker area. Go ahead and get that in here. And if I'm not happy with how dark something is, I'll just come back and give it another coat. Alright, so I'm going to come into these recesses. We're just going to paint down along this line. This is going to help the model be a lot more readable. Get a very sharp point on this, at least as sharp as it will get. Again, I haven't used this brush in something like 20 years, and so this is going to be me trying to see kind of what it can do. Just like with our makeup brush challenge, sometimes it's fun just to give it a go with something that's less than ideal, just to see kind of how you can make use of the tools, even if they aren't the best tools for the job. I'm going to come under here. I'm going to darken this out as well. Kind of started in the middle of this model, which is not a bad thing necessarily. And so he is sitting basically flush, like not flush, but level like this. So he'll be level on the model itself. And so this also helps me to know where I should be adding the shadow and which side of various pieces of him will end up dark. So we're coming in here. Make sure our paint is nice and mixed so that it flows well. And again, this is us darkening the shadows. We're using the scale 75 dark. It's not super dark, which is nice, because this is going to let us keep just a little bit of the zenithal here, but it is going to pull it down where we want it to be and just add more definition here to what we're trying to do. I'm going to come down here. This part of his leg should definitely be darker. And some of this we won't even see because he's going to actually be on a kind of saddle of sorts. But that's okay. As I've talked about in previous streams, I'm the kind of guy that will paint the inside of a rhino because then I will know. And that's how I get enjoyment from the hobby. Go ahead and wash my brush out here completely. Yeah, for a very old brush, this is not bad. It has a reasonable tip on it too. I believe it's sable. It is. It's a very old sable brush. Grab a little bit more water here. Mix it into my black. This again is a scale 75 black. It's in between a matte and a semi-gloss. So it's definitely not the most matte black out there, but it is not particularly shiny either. And what's really nice about this is you can still see all of what's underneath this too. This black is not as strong as, say, an army painter black. If I were using army painter and it wasn't thinned way down, this would be very dark all the places that I was using it. Right, get a nice tip on my brush, come back. Let's see if I can't show you really well what I'm doing. Just coming down and following the edge of the model here. Just being very careful, stay in that recess. This is really going to help once we start doing our non-metallics, but this is really, at this point, just bringing our shadows down so that we have greater contrast. And that is so that this will read a bit better. Which is really what you're always trying to do with your models, is make them readable, make it so that people can see what it is you're trying to show them. Come under here. We know this part is going to be in shadow. So I'm going to come on to the bottom side of this. If he's sitting like this, we know basically this is going to be a reverse zenithal. And so when we turn it upside down like this, woo, the brush kind of got out of my hand. When we turn it upside down like this, we can see kind of where the highest spots are, which are now the lowest spots. Darken all of that. And you can see we're also being helped by the zenithal here, so I'm staying away from some of these areas that I can see have additional gray paint on them from the overcoat here, and that's helping me to make sure I stay in the right place. And we can see here that this side of this panel is going to be the dark side, so we'll grab that up. Same thing here. All right, I'm going to come under here and increase our shadows there as well. We're going to come into this fold of the armor. Sometimes this is called panel lining. Normally you would do this a little bit later if it was true panel lining. But in this case, because we're going to work from the bottom up, with our midtone kind of already shown to us, we're going to be doing this step now. But the truth is, there's no right or wrong way per se, as long as you're getting the result that you'd like. Right. Let's see. This side of this is angled down a bit, so we are going to make this darker. We'll save that bit up here, but we're going to come in, going to line that part there so that stands out just a little more. Same inside of there. Now I'm going to wash my brush out completely. I have two pots here too. So my first pot is for when I have a little bit more paint on my brush. My second pot is the pot that I pull water out of and that I give the brush the final wash on, because I do want to keep my brush. And just then I turned the brush incorrectly and got a little bit too much paint on it, so I'm just going to preserve my really old brush that I like. I'm going to go ahead and clean it out real quick. All right, so we're going to pick up some more, get a nice fine point on our brush, and come in. So we've done almost all of his body around here. And so on this bottom half, I am going to come back over it, but for now, let's go ahead and keep doing our way up. You can see here I'm turning my brush just to get the best angle to get in there. Same thing here. Now, someone out there is probably wondering whether or not you could just do this with a wash. And the answer is kind of. You could do something similar with a wash. It would get into all of the recesses. The problem, though, is that it would get on everything. So everything will be darkened. And then you'll be forced to go back over the whole thing. Now, that's not the end of the world, and you definitely could, but for the style that I'm going to go for, I think it's going to be easier, and I have certainly much more control to come in the way I'm going and put in my shadows where I want them. Yeah, there we go. So we have that. Looks like I didn't hit this side, but I am now. And go all the way under. A nice clean line there. Excellent. And I keep taking him back, looking at him, seeing how he's going to sit, and then that is informing how I put these lines on him, or where I put the shadows. We're going to come back in. Let's see. I have a few people in chat today. I'm going to come back in, and we're going to keep working our way up, making sure we have a very fine point on our brush. We're going to come in here, and we're going to be putting this black in the recesses here. This is going to look very strong to start, but that's okay because we are going to come back, and this is all eventually going to get blended. But this is so we have some nice shadows to work with. You can always come back and do these things, you know, in whatever order, but some orders, depending on what your end result you're looking for, is going to make it easier. And sometimes it's fun to mix it up. If you start from a mid-tone, you'll have a lot more visual references, because your mid-tone, you'll always know how much mid-tone you have left. If you start, though, from your shadow, you have to kind of figure out where you're going with your mid-tone, and that becomes a bit more interesting, because now you need to be able to visualize that whole thing, whereas when you start with your mid-tone, you already kind of know what the mid-tone, how much mid-tone you're working with. So it really just depends on partially your comfort level and kind of where you want to end up. Sometimes how you start will definitely influence how light or dark something is on your model. You can see I'm just coming here, adding these shadows. I do realize this is some pretty subtle work here, but it's going to pay off later whenever we're out here working to get some contrast on our model. It's difficult to come back in particular with what I'm doing here in these recesses, mostly because you'll start hitting the other things that you're doing. Getting these shadows in there now will make our lives easier later. And again, more contrast on your model is where you want to be. Come in here, add that shadow there. I'm also thinking about how this metal is going to look in the end and what kind of shape it is. So the kind of base shape that something is will determine how you're going to do your non-metallics. There's just a known pattern that light will follow on, say, a cylinder, or on, say, a square, where you're going to want to do each side slightly differently to show that it's a square. Say from something that's actually more closely resembling a ball or a sphere, there's known patterns of how the light's going to fall. And when you can match your object that you're painting up to that, it's going to really help you to get the light correct, so that when someone else looks at your model, they won't think it looks strange. They'll think, oh, that's kind of like how light would go on that. So come in here, following this recess. And sometimes I will have to turn this model in strange ways just to get to where I want to get. I'll do my best to make sure it gets back for you. We're going to come underneath this horn, actually both sides. A little more in total over there, and in here we're going to focus on these recesses. And then this side of him is actually up, but we're going to line back here, just the edge. And that's going to help define this a little bit more. Yep, and you can see a lot of that detail is starting to kind of come out here for us. And we're leaving just those high spots, so we're making the shadows much darker, and that's going to help us in the end, leaving these big flat panels like this, where you can still see the zenithal on it really well. That's why I did the zenithal, so that we would have that effect. We're going to come back here. Catch this panel. I'm going to go ahead and wash my brush out completely. Come over to my clean water, pick up a little extra water, bring it into my black here so that it flows. A little bit too much on my brush. I am going to wash that out again. And come back in. There we go. Picking that up, making a sharp point on the brush. I'm going to come back, leaving that edge there. I'm going to come under and catch this panel as well, because all of this is in much deeper shadow. This edge here, or this facet I should say, is going to be darker. I'm going to do the same to this, but I'm going to leave that other panel facing up, and I'm just going to come into this edge and get that line established. Same for up here. I'm going to come in and establish that line. Then bring it down to that point. Again, we're just trying to make everything much more readable. Same thing here. I'm going to come into this. Going to come almost all the way down to the lip of that panel, but not all the way. Darken that. Now, since he's standing like this, we'll just turn him straight around. We have him here. We have lots of stuff that we're going to be going through on this side here. But let's catch. So he's going to be sitting, so we shouldn't really be painting underneath him, because you won't see that at all. But we will be seeing these panels of his armor. And since he's actually going to be under this, this should be dark as well for any of this that you're able to see. So we're just going to come back with that black, but I am going to leave this leading edge here so that that stands out. And we have here as well. Coming under here, and then leaving this edge on here. And I'm going to catch that edge again. Go ahead, my brush feels a little dry, so I'm going to wash it out, go with my clean water, come back, pick up some more of my black, which is still flowing well. Get a nice sharp point on my brush. And we're going to come back and continue working on his right side. The side's going to be holding the sword. Actually, I'm going to pick this piece right there. Probably drives some people crazy to see me keep going back and forth to bits, but you don't always see everything on the first pass. And when I do see it, I'd rather jump on it. That way I don't forget. But now I am going to come in here, and we can see the outline of these panels here. So let's darken this panel. And we're going to come and line this bit down here. I'm going to hit the camera, as is tradition. Let's bring this closer. Alright, so I'm going to come in here. That's light. And then we're going to come into the center of this so that we can establish this shadow here that falls in the deepest part of this. I'm going to run it right into here. And now we have some words here which I don't actually recognize. I'm going to go over these though, because each one of these is recessed. So we're going to come down into these recesses, darken that up so that in relative terms the edges stand out for us. Make sure you can see this. Let's move my light here. There we go. That looks a little better. I'm actually going to darken this panel too a bit. Again, this is to provide contrast. It's not necessarily 100% accurate to how light would work, but by making every other one of these panels darker, I now have established the shape much better, and I can then come back in and line this to get a little bit darker area at the transition. We're going to do the same here. Just bring the brush in, following the transition, pick up just a touch more paint, come into the corner, and we're going to continue this line here. Yeah, we're starting to see a lot more detail here, even just with what is essentially panel lining him. We are getting to see those details start to come out. It's easier to read. Alright, we're going to continue on with our thinned black paint by scale 75 here. Now, let's see, we're basically done with that shoulder pad, so let's hit, make sure you can see here, we're going to hit the area underneath, and there are these ridges in this, and so I'm going to try and get the paint mostly right at the bottom of each of those ridges. And that's going to help that read. We're going to come in and do the darkest parts here of this. And we're going to do the same over here. Let's see how he's standing. Yep, so we're going to do the same here. because there's two sources of light on, well, there's three sources. There is a source of light that is basically directly over him. There is a source of light that is red and from the right. And then there's a source of light that is blue and from the left. And we're going to try and capture all of that. We want to have all of that read. And I'm just going to pull this thin black down in through some of these cracks, making sure that these are nice and readable. I'm going to come in here. Let's see. Yep. We're going to come in here and we're going to line this down. Come from the other side, grab that, keep on going. We can see these cracks here. Just going to make sure they're readable. As well as this portion right here. Continue just to find the cracks at the top of the shoulder pad. And line the area just under it so that that shape is very clear. All right. Let's finish up the work here on his back. So we'll come underneath this panel. Get that, but not all the way to the bottom. Same there. Come over this panel one more time. Make it a little bit darker, especially since it's on the back. And then we're going to come in here. I'm just going to turn this so I can get to it a little easier. I'm going to come into this section here and get this lined. And right around the bottom of his neck and the area under this symbol. As well as the area inside of there. Alright. That's looking a bit better. I'm going to catch this panel along its edge. And if we can, we're going to get in here and do the same. That's a particularly difficult area to get in. And not many people are going to see it, but I still think it's worth if you can. In fact, I'm going to switch my brush out here to a Kalinsky Masterclass by Army Painter. I'm going to grab a little bit of this black and I'm going to come in here just to be able to reach in here the way I want with this smaller brush. And I'm going to switch over to this brush for a moment as I use it to continue down these lines. And here on his chest, this continues down into this area behind the skulls, which we're going to make a little darker. Add our shadows in. So I'm going to turn it so it's a little easier for me to get to. We're going to pull this paint from there up to here. It's getting a little dry, so let's grab up some water. These very small brushes dry out very quickly, just because they don't really have a belly to hold on to the moisture. Alright, there's actually a sheen on this paint which makes it a little more difficult to see, but we're going to pull this right to there. Sometimes they don't talk as much because there's actually such a small area I'm working in. Breathing and talking actually changes where I end up. Alright, now we're going to take our master class here. Going to grab a little bit more water. That's too much water. And we're going to grab up some more of this. Now, it's possible that while working with such a small amount here, I'm going to have to actually grab some inks. Inks have a really nice property of staying wet even when there's a very small amount of it, which is why I do recommend having access to some Liquitex inks. I found them invaluable when doing work in places that is difficult to get to with very small brushes. You can also layer the inks in really easily, which is nice. The inks tend to be fairly matte, so you don't have to worry too much about what it's going to look like compared to the rest of your paints, especially if you're working with a fairly matte paint line. And I'm just coming in here with this Kolinsky Masterclass by Army Painter, and I'm catching underneath his cheek. And we need to do the other. He was already in so many sub-assemblies, I ultimately decided not to do the head separately, although you absolutely could if you were doing this for, say like Golden Demon or something, or you were going to use this in a competition. You would definitely want to do that, because there's places on this face you're not going to be able to easily get to. But for my purposes, that is unnecessary. Alright, so I've been able to get there on his face. I am going to fix this line over here from the side. There's a jitter in it, and I just need to smooth that back so it's not problematic. There we go. Alright, we're going to go ahead and put our Masterclass brush back away. We're going to go ahead and grab up our standard brush from 20 years ago. And we're going to pick up some more of our black on the table. We're going to grab just a little bit of water. Even though this is on a wet palette, it's still will dry as you pull it thin. So we're going to come from underneath here. This is going to be the darker area of the horns. And we're going to go ahead and go through here. I'm not going to worry too much about the ridges here on these bottom areas. Let's see, I want to make sure you can see what I'm doing here. So I'm going to come in here. And so again, we're treating this a lot like a cube. These horns have some very strong angles built in on them. And so by treating them like a cube here, and we treat each piece of the horn as a facet, we're going to be able to get a lot more definition in them, which is great. And then here, this is a flat panel, and it's actually facing the front pieces of these horns, like here and here, are actually going to be facing almost exactly to you, but they slope ever so slightly down. So we're going to leave that very last portion there, and we're going to come up here, making sure to keep this on this piece of the panel. And we're going to bring this up to this portion right here. And we're leaving just this bottom piece of this. That way you can see where that lip is on this. And we're going to do the same here. We're going to come just above there. And we're going to bring these strokes here. And I'm going this direction here because now I'm paying attention to how the light is going to look on these. And this area really is where most people's eyes are going to be. So I'm being very careful here and making these directional strokes. And I'm going to come back on this side because I'm not even following the thing I'm saying. And we're going to go back over it. So not only is it going to be darker here, but now we're going to make sure these strokes go this direction. because we're following the way these horns are going. All right, so that's looking good. You can already see here, it really helps to define where and how the light works on these horns. All right, and now this is going to be the brightest portion over here. So starting here, about halfway, we're going to do it again. We're going to come up to a point here that I'm just going to arbitrarily decide is the inflection point for when that changes over again. I think I want it to be like that. And we're going to do the same here on the other side. Come along that, making sure get that line there. And so I've been doing non-metallics now really for about a year, trying to get good at them, and so this model is not going to be any exception. A lot of the work that we do here is going to be non-metallics. All right, we got that there. And now we're going to do the same over here, and we're not going to go exactly the same amount because the light's going to be acting just a little different. So we're going to come up here. I'm going to add this in here. Right, there we are. We're going to come from this side here. We're going to take a look at where this shadow should be. And that's going to come quite far down there, but not all the way. This is almost like doing kind of the power sword thing, because you have this ridge in the middle, but of course it's not exactly a power sword. We have to kind of be careful how we go. And so I want to keep those lines there along the edge. And you can see I'm not making this the same on purpose. That way we're adding just a little bit of visual interest here. All right, I'm going to bring this line a little thinner. And I'm going to come back over this to make this a little darker. And the same over here. I'm going to make this, just a little darker. Then this, I am going to go over, not really to try and make it darker, but just to fill it in. The first time I did it there, I missed a bit. There we go, just to make that a nice, solid, strong color. I'm going to come back here and do the same. This is the part that most YouTubers cut out that you're seeing on stream here, where you end up having to go over your paints multiple times. The whole Duncan Rhodes too thin coats thing. All right, coming back again, a little bit more water, washing my brush out, picking up some of that paint on our nice thin tip, and coming back in and just strengthening the area underneath. We're going to flip him right here to make this a little easier, get you back in the center here. Very careful not to hit any of the spots I've already worked on, so I don't undo the good work. You can see here on the face, I'm going to come just under there, because while I'm got him turned, I can see some spots that needed a little work. Needed to be a little darker. Alright, that's looking pretty good. And again, this face is where people are going to be looking, so we want to really do our best here. I'm going to start catching the area underneath this plume to darken it out, because that's definitely in some pretty deep shadow. We'll bring that up, make it come to a nice point right there, just to sharpen all of that. And we can come back here and do the same. We're just coming under the plume, making sure that's nice and dark. Even down here, we don't want to have too many stray strokes. We want to make sure we're keeping it on the underside here. This just gives us a nice dark shadow to work from, and then to blend into. Because if we don't start with some extremes here as we go, it's going to be a bit more difficult to work with. All right, so we're going to come in here. And so what we did to the front, we're now going to do a similar thing to the back. So you can see what we've done here. We started the process of our non-metallics. And the back needs to be done too. So we're going to come in and do the same. I'm going to come underneath, get our shadows going. Same here. I'm going to go right up to that line there. Coming down here at the base, around the bottom of his head. Make that a bit clearer. And we're just going to do the same. So sometimes what you would do is reverse this and have this the other way. But I don't actually mind doing it on these horns exactly. So we could have the juxtaposition there or here. It just really depends on how you want it to look. Let's see now. Now that I'm thinking about it and really looking at it. Catch the bottom of that plume there while I'm thinking. I think I actually will jump back and forth and make the bottom of this a bit more bright. And so I'm going to come in here in this case. And we're going to add this kind of to the center here. And then we'll be blending back down. Sometimes you might hear a little pop. That is this tape here sticking to my finger. Alright, then we're going to do the same on the other side. Again, not exactly how light works, but this is one of the things we're going to do just to add some visual interest in here. And we're going to catch this with a line. So this whole thing will be highlighted out. And just as we did with the other side, we're going to darken this side out. Something really strong to work with. And then in this case though, we're going to come in and hit this area in the back. Same here. As I bunk the camera just a little bit. We're going to come under here where this is as well. Increase that shadow. To come down here and do the same. take a look at what we got. And so this does actually curve, these top pieces, they curve back towards you. And so what that would end up doing is creating a lighter spot kind of at the bottom, or in this area right here where it turns, but then this being overhung will actually create a little bit of a dark area up there as well. So let's go ahead and add that. We'll get to the side where that kind of is going to do its thing. I'm going to say about there is where it turns. And same thing over here. About there is where it's going to turn. So we'll come up here, get that put in. And then on this side, it's going to be about here. Same thing here. It's going to be about the same place. Yep, we have 3 sides here to work with. And so in this side, this is actually going to be brighter here because these 2 sides are what's under, and then this side is what's over. And so that means it's going to actually be right there where the shadow falls. So all of this is just looking at the shapes that you have to work with and kind of seeing where these are going to naturally fall and then putting them in. And of course, there's a little bit of brush control you'll need here to make sure you aren't getting paint all over the place. All right. Let's see how we're doing. Wipe out my brush while we're doing that. Just checking to see all of our spots here. Yep, because he's again going to be standing just like this. Each time I stop here and look at him, I'm just trying to decide exactly where all this is. And I want to make sure I highlight any special stuff. There's a little kind of break right there on that. And again, this is black armor. Before, the armor we were doing was kind of a golden, not metallic. But in this case, we are working with black, which is a little harder to get to read because sometimes you have too much of this gray color, and that really doesn't want to read. But I think in this case, we're doing okay. All right, so that is our black in for now. We're actually going to do a little more with this in a moment. But let's start working on our blue. A good way to keep black looking black, but then not overdoing it as you go into your highlights, is to have a little blue here. So I'm going to take some of my scale 75 Mediterranean blue, and we're going to bring some of our black into it to darken it down. So I'm going to grab up some of our black here, some of our blue, bring this in. Create a darker blue. I'm going to grab just a little bit of water to help this. All right. And now, as our armor approaches some of the other lighter spots, we're actually going to then have the blue on there. So let's see how we want to start. So if we come here, going to that light spot there. Onto this black. Come in there. You can see it's breaking just a little bit, and that's because there's just a little bit too much moisture in it. But that's okay. I'd rather there be just a tad too much than not enough. And we're just coming in here, starting to blend with our blues. Making sure to give some space and respect to the area that's already got the highlight on it, because I will be coming back and working with that highlight, but I want to preserve it to a reasonable degree here. And I do want to see this color just under, but I don't want to obliterate that other highlight there. Alright, this is adding our blue in. Come back over that there. I'm going to be doing the same thing up here at our transition points. Bringing that back down into our black. And keep in mind, there's going to be a red light that comes from the right over here. So we want to keep in mind that that's where we're going to end up going with some of this. We're going to kind of blend that towards this edge with a little bit of stippling, just to give the shape. Alright, you can see we're coming in there. It's a little bit difficult as this paint is a little bit shiny as it starts to dry. And we're just going to stipple just a little bit to hide that shape there that the paint has as it goes up against the black. And blend that in. Stippling is always your friend here. Just going to wash my brush out here. Come back over. Get a little bit more of our paint, so I'm going to take our blue in here, grab a little bit of our black, a little more of our black. Alright. And by mixing this myself, I can control exactly how dark it is, and I can also control how light I get as I transition through the different pieces here. So we have that there. We're going to do the same here at our transition points. So we're going to come in there, add some of this blue in here at our transition. And this is going to also help to sell where the blue's coming from the other way. So we're going to have all these reflections going all over the place. I'm going to come in there. Some of these darker areas here. And this is just moving from that black to our blue here in some of these areas. I'm going to come in here and we're going to do the same. I'm going to choose some of these panels to do this with. And they just so happen to be the opposite panels that we put the black on in this case, to really help us see these shapes. All right. Then in here we're going to do the same thing. Going to come underneath at the point where the black and the gray meet. do just have to be patient with this, and you don't want to put it everywhere, because generally you wouldn't see it everywhere. But you do want to put it where it naturally would be if there was a light source coming from the other direction and reflecting down. Catching the areas that have that transition. Same all the way around this piece here. I'm going to turn this so my strokes can be the right direction for this horn. Alright, we'll take that to that edge. And then give the illusion there of there being kind of a sharper part right there. There's not, but that's what I want it to look like. Pick up a little more of my paint. This is a very thin paint, it's very watery, which is what's letting me keep going with it for so long here. You can see here it kind of wants to break right there, so I have to work with it just a little bit. We're going to hit this panel and this panel. And there, and just in that transitional area. Hit there. And there, but not all the way to the back. And bring this through here. Alright. Now we're just giving a bit of a blue sheen here at those transition points. We'll come back and these highlights will be a bit more intense, but now we have to do the back. Because we can't forget the back of the model. People will definitely look at it. Catch that in that transition, the top of that, and in these panels. And these will be a bit less seen as he's going to be sitting. But we're going to come through, give that to there, skip a panel there, and give it there. We're going to come underneath this panel. Same there. Alright. It's really important that we keep some of these spaces still black because we do want it to still read as black. If when we're done, when we come through and it doesn't read as black, we'll have to add some more and we'll end up having to kind of repaint some sections. So that's where you want to be careful. You want him to have a light on him, so you want to do your lighting effects, but you also don't want to completely destroy where you've been. Alright, so now we need to come in here because remember there's a red light coming from the right. And so this is this black blue armor, but we do want it to have this red as well. So we're going to come through, wipe out my brush. I'm actually going to get a drink real quick. And here we are at about the halfway point today. Alright. And so because this light's coming from this side, we do want there to be some of it in our deepest shadows here. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to grab up some of our black. I'm going to bring it over here. I'll wipe out our brush. And then we're going to grab some of our red. And we're going to make this very warm dark color with red plus black in about equal amounts. I'm going to grab a little bit of water so that this will flow. And pick this up. And now we're going to bring this in, but we're going to do this subtly. We're not going to do this super crazy sauce. We want it to be there, but not really, really harsh. Now I'm following the lines that I made before, the same directionality. We have it if it's coming from the bottom here. We do want it here. Then we're going to go back and forth on this one, though. They're really close to each other. Just waiting on that to dry just a little bit to see how much it needs more. Alright, so I'm going to wash my brush out here. I'm going to focus just on this front area right here. We're going to do the rest around the back as well. It doesn't need to be done quite as well because this front area and the face is really where people are going to be looking. So I just added another brush of red here. And I'm going to my red-black mixture, now I'm going to come in and I'm going to slowly build up some additional red here. This is going to give you that coming from underneath red look. Still want to make sure to do enough of this. So I have something to work with. We're going to let that dry just a little bit right there. And we can really see how this effect's starting to take off here. That's working well. I'm going to add another bit of red into our red-black mixture. I'm going to come in, do the same. Just keep on layering that red in. Do the same here. And we'll have to keep in mind that places like this area on its pauldron, some of these other areas here are going to have that light effect on them too. So we'll have to make note of that and get these in the proper place. But this is kind of the test. You could probably argue I shouldn't be testing on the place that's kind of most important, and that would be reasonable. But this is where we're doing it. So now I'm going to get a little bit of that red pure. Grab a little bit of water with my pure red here. And we're going to come in under here, same strokes. Just get that in. Same thing up top. Same thing at the very top. It's just a little bit much right there, so I'm going to take my brush with nothing on it. I'm just going to spread just a little bit. There we go. Wipe that brush out. Oh, you can really see that's coming along. Gonna grab a little more of my black here. Mix in just a touch of the blue. We're gonna keep going right here. I'd like to see that get a little closer. And same here. All right. And now we're going to grab a little bit of our ivory. And we're going to use this to get some of the final highlights on this. And so I'm just finishing this horn area on this front side. That way you can see kind of what I'm going to end up doing to the whole thing, because there's no way I'm going to finish this today. But if I finish this section here, you'll be able to see how I'm going to paint the rest of this. And it's just being very methodical about how we're going to do it. So I'm going to grab up some of our ivory here. And of course, we always save our pure white, if we are even going to use pure white, for the very end, because after that, there's nowhere to go. So there's some very, very thinned ivory. I'm going to bring that in. And we're going to highlight in here. And I'm just dotting this ivory into place. Same thing here. Just dotting that into place. I'm going to catch the very tip of this. This section too, these are going to be pretty bright. So no matter what I do, those are going to be pretty bright as well. Alright. So now we can see this area here. I'm going to take just a touch of our blue here. This is all still wet. And we're going to blend that in to there. Same thing here. And same thing here. Pull this in down into the ivory so we can get a little bit better transition here. Now, this ivory, so there's a mistake up here for sure. This needs to go all the way across, because that's how reflections work. So, I'm just going to pull a little bit of that. That's just a mistake from the way I did it, which is kind of pulling that very thin paint in. But it needs to come all the way from side to side. There can't be like a little pool of stuff there. All right. So let's see how that's going. We have really nice definition between the pieces. And then to really make all of this stand out, we are going to edge highlight these bits here. So we're just waiting on that to dry. In fact, what I think I'll do is actually mute you real quick and then grab the hair dryer. All right, got you back. And for this, I do like to use a little bit of a drier paint. So what I'm going to do is be using some Liquitex Heavy Body Acrylic Professional Titanium White. All sorts of words there, but basically it's a paint. In fact, I'll let it come out here so you can see it. It's kind of like toothpaste almost. I'm just going to grab my little edge highlighting brush here. This is actually just a WizKids multi-purpose. It's got kind of a bad brush. And so what makes it useful, though, is that it's almost a cylinder of bristles. It's kind of strange. It doesn't really have a tip to it exactly, but it has very stiff, somewhat long bristles, and that allows me to make it edge highlight fairly easily. So I'm going to take our Citadel Standard brush from 20 years ago, and I'm going to put that back, and then I'm just going to put an edge highlight on this to see what it looks like, and see if that's enough definition from it. And so the way I do this is I grab some of this with a little bit of water. I don't want it to be so dry that it really is a paste. Well, we're going to come back, and then I'm going to wipe out most of this. And now we're going to come along at this very sharp edge here, and that's going to pick it up very nicely. And I will end up having to redo a little bit of this because I didn't paint the back yet, but this is going to give you an idea of how all of this is going to kind of come together. This is also why we did not use white for that highlight. We saved it for this, so that then this line becomes very, very clear. This edge on this brush should allow me to get down in there, which it does. Let's turn this guy this way. We're going to catch this edge coming out of there. And always feel free to turn your model how you need to get the highlight that you want. It's very easy to just kind of autopilot and stick to the way you're oriented, but it is 100% worth it. You can hear it's dried out now, so go ahead and wash my brush out completely. Start over again. Grab some more of this paint with just a little bit of water. Wipe out most of it here, and then come back. That's going to let me get a very nice sharp edge highlight here. I'm going to come in here at the very edge where that should be the brightest. Just grab that in there. Same here. Same there. Same in there. Have a few little spots there. Have a few scratches that go across. Alright, and so this kind of gives you an idea about what the rest of this armor is going to look like. It is pretty highly stylized, but so is the rest of the army that this guy is going in. This, I think, has a lot of black here, so it properly reads as actually being black, which is great. And then it also has some interesting highlights, some things we use a bunch of different colors in. It's going to pick up the rest of the colors, which are also blue and red, pretty purely so, that are on the model. So it's enough to keep things interesting, but also it's not going to overwhelm here, so it still appears black. So this is basically what we're going to be doing to the rest of this armor, and I'm going to keep going on it while I still have time, but ultimately I will run out of time since this is a fairly lengthy process. We've been at it for about an hour and 20 minutes, and so far I've managed to do the whole armor with kind of the base stuff, but then finishing just this top portion. So it'll be quite a while before it's all done, but you can see where we're going. So I'm going to go ahead and wash this brush out. I'm going to drop it instead of putting it back on my rack. Now I'm going to go back here. We're going to pick up our Citadel Standard brush again. And we're going to kind of pick up where we left off for the rest of the armor. We've already put in the blue here. And so we'll just keep going on this front side. And then I'm going to do the back side off camera, since that's even a little bit less interesting. Okay, so we're going to come in here, and we're going to do, so what we have left is our reds in here. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to pick up some new red. This is our scale 75 red. I'm going to wash that out, and we're going to grab up some of our black. About equal parts here to start. So we have a very dark red. It's like a cherry color, kind of. I'm gonna wash my brush out here. Grab up some of this. And then we're gonna come into some of these sections of armor, and we're gonna add this color. Not everywhere, but in some of the places. Especially the places that are going to kind of be around the from where that other light source is coming. Get that from the bottom there. Have this on the opposite side for the horn. Build up this towards that transition, and on this side, we're going to leave it dark over there. And we're going to build this up in this area, on that side of that, and we're going to come in and do the same over here. And we're going to focus mostly on it coming from this side, but not entirely. Most of this is going to be shielded, but not his knee. Let's see, yeah. This portion of his knee will definitely still have that light exposure there. We're going to come to this side and under. And then this should actually change my stroke here, because this is actually more of like a cylinder. This is also kind of a cylinder, so I should probably have that like that there too, but gives you an idea. Come in here, do the same. You can see it coming together. So we're going to do a step change on this red. So it's not going to be nearly as light as this gets over here, because this is the highest part of the model where you would see like the most saturated colors, because it has access to the most light. But we're going to come down here, and we're actually going to add just a little more here. Nothing super crazy, but We definitely want a little more. This is also a cylinder here. So cylinders have their reflections run from one end to the other with no break. And this side right here is going to strengthen this in these areas. Didn't put any there, but we did here. Get you back in the center. I realize a lot of this is very subtle, especially at these parts. This in here. Alright, do a little bit of our pure up here for our upper portions. So this is just me grabbing some pure red in here, thinning it down quite a bit. So I want to stay away from there. We'll come in here. Just on some of our highest portions. Get that in. Same there. We don't need a lot. We do want that to be there. All right. So that's looking pretty good there. We're going to come in now with our ivory, just like we did before. Get a little water for our ivory so that it will flow. And every time I put my brush on my palette, I am twirling it so that I can have a really nice point here to work with. Let's see where that focuses. There it is. And so this allows me to come back in and start doing my highlights in exactly where I want them to be. So in this case, I want them to be over here. This is ivory. So we're going to focus them on these places here. And this is not a pure white, this is ivory. Some of these sections in here. We're going to come into some of these larger areas here. Get our ivory here where it's going to be brightest. I'm not talking a ton in some of these places, but it is difficult to make sure I get everything where I want it. So sometimes I have to concentrate here just a little bit. Alright, then that's going to be in this area too. Let's see where that highlight's going, and then this highlight's going to be similar to this with the blue. So we're going to make that across there, and we're going to come back. In fact, what I'm going to do is just finish that out there. Then in here, I'm going to get that in there, that across there. That's where it's going to go. Going to do a little bit of an edge highlight there. We know this is going to also have that top of the finger. Outline this next finger here. Now we're not going to see a whole lot of this hand. This is where the shield is at. And then for this, I'm actually going to grab up some of my black. And this is where this chainmail is. I'm going to grab up some of my white here. And I'm going to make kind of a middling gray. And this middling gray is what I'm going to use on this chainmail here. And this chainmail here. And then we'll come back and highlight that out in a moment. Alright, I'm just going to grab up some more of our ivory. We're going to continue to find those portions here that need a stronger highlight. Oh, our brush has gotten a little bit of a weird shape, so let's go ahead, get it going again. There we go. That as well. All right. We're going to grab some of our blue here, bring it back down, and some of our black. Mix that in here, so we'll have some more of our blue mixture. That's just about equal parts blue mixed with black here. So this way we can actually strengthen up some of these spots now. These are not a weapon. These are connectors for his shield. going to smooth some of these transitions here using our blue. Strengthen it in some places. Have the blue run here. There as well. Tone down some of that transition, some of this. And we're going to want this plume to stand out a bit. So we're going to paint this plume with a different red. I'm going to go ahead and grab up one of my Citadel colors that I like quite a bit. It's not this one. Let's try again. Alright, so we're going to grab some Mephiston here. And this is just a little bit differently pigmented red. And it's going to make this plume stand out a bit from the rest of the red that we have on here. So I'm going to grab up some of that. And this is a very, very strongly, very highly pigmented red. One of my favorites for sure. Probably my favorite red. And one of my favorite colors in general. But we're going to get a little water on here so that we flow. And then we're going to start painting in this plume. So we've done a bit of work on the armor. It still needs to be blended in and down. And we need to come over here and finish out some of those highlights. But right now, let's see if we can't finish off the head area. And here I'm being very, very careful not to get this red on the horns. And you can see how much brighter this red is. It will dry a little bit darker, but this is definitely going to be a different red, so it should stand out. Bring this over here. We're really just going to try and hit all of the tops of this, but without accidentally getting it on the horns. Let's see if we can slide in there. Looks like the answer is no, at least not with this brush. There we go. And so if I was going to be using a wash on this model, this would be the perfect place to do it. Get this really nice, bright, saturated red, bring it back down with, say, a Nuln Oil, and then you can come back and highlight it back up just using the same red. And so that's probably what I'm going to end up doing here, as I've done plumes with this in the past, and I quite liked the way they turned out. Turn this here. Take a look at my monitor. Yep. Gonna thin this out just a touch. Alright, let's see if I can sneak this brush down in here, or if I'm gonna need... Nope, looks like I can get there. This is just where it's thinned down just a little too much, and then it starts to tear. But that's okay. As it dries on the model, I can actually just pull it into place and remove those tears. If you allow them to sit, then what will end up happening is you'll see it. And that would be less good. Catch the side here. Same thing over here. All right, as I hold you out of frame, seems good. Wouldn't be a true video by me if I did not at some point hold the model out of frame. All right. There we go. All right, and we're definitely going to go over this again because we want this to be very, very strong, very, very bright, because we are going to have to come back over it. So let's go ahead and mute you up and get this dried. All right, washing out my brush here. That should be nice and dry. Let's go ahead and grab just a touch more of our Mephiston red. Get that onto the palette. Gonna wipe out as much of that as I can. Go ahead and wash my brush out. Get my clean water. Then get a touch of water here, add it in. Just want it to flow nicely, and it does. So we're going to do it again. We're just going to add another layer. So then this is a nice, strong color on here so that we can work with it. There was an old model of Archaon that is very old. It's made of pewter. I actually have one sitting over here somewhere. And I never really knew what it was. I just thought it was a Chaos Lord on a horse. And I didn't make the connection that this was the same guy, even though his shield and sword are very similar, because the horse was gone. And so the horse, he seems to have traded out the horse for kind of a cosmic horror thing that seems to have absorbed a couple of other demons, the Tzeentch, Nurgle, and Khorne ones. Alright. That's looking pretty good there. Alright. I'm seeing if I can't get this face area done so you can have truly a good idea about where it's going. But I think you can at this point see what this is going to look like. As I layer all of these different colors together, and as I put all these things down, it'll slowly take shape into being a chromatic non-metallic metal over a black armor, or with a black armor. At least that is the intention. All right, let's go ahead and mute you up. Go ahead and get the strat. All right. We do want to make sure this is very dry, because if we put a wash on it and it's not completely dry, things will go wrong. All right, let me grab up some old Nuln Oil. In fact, if I actually have the red one, I would use that. Let's see. Yep, so here's our Nuln Oil. And let's see. Truchi. So I do have a couple of options here for this, depending on how I want to go with it. If I wanted it to be a little bit more purpley, a little bit more kind of royally looking, I could go with like a Druchii. If I wanted it to be a bit more dull, I could go with a sepia. Or I could use some Reikland Flesh Shade on it, and that's going to maintain some of my reds. And I feel like, rather than go with like a pure red wash, which I have a red tone here that I could be using from Army Painter here. But I think what I'll do is go somewhere in the middle. I think we'll use Reikland on this, which should give me some good shade in the recesses, but then not take it so far out of the red wheelhouse. So let's grab up some of this. We're going to go directly from the pot here, and I'm going to put this right over here very carefully. This is one of the last bottles of Reikland that I have. Then we're going to come in and we're just going to shade this in. And this is a good time to get all of this done down in here before, and I might end up with Nuln Oil after all, we'll see. This is definitely a very subtle shade, but maybe that's what I'm going to be looking for in the end. We do want it to be consistent across the whole thing, so we're going to pull the shade even into the darker portions here. And so this is the bottom part of this. I am going to leave black. In fact, I do feel like, yeah, that was scary for me too. That sound. I knocked over one of the, I knocked over the shield there. Let's go ahead and grab some of our Nuln Oil too. I can already tell, and I'm not going to be quite satisfied with how dark it is right here. So we'll come in here with the Nuln Oil, and we're going to blend these two together, especially in these darkest areas here. And then just focus this into these crevices. So what we have here is kind of a 50-50 of Reikland and Nuln Oil. This actually is giving me the darker recesses that I wanted to see. I'm just dotting it in. It'll flow because this is got a very low surface tension by design. All right, let's close that up before something terrible happens. And we're going to cheat. We're going to dry this with the hairdryer again. I'm going to hold it in such a way that it is going to be in the recesses the way I want. I'm just kind of shaking it here. There we go. All right. All right, there we are. So this has been nice and dried now. We're going to come back in using our Mephiston that's nice and thin, and then we're just going to highlight up. So same dealio that we did before with the other highlights. Just going to find those edges and we're going to highlight. Doing our best to keep this out of those recesses that we just shaded. Get you in the center here where you can see. Alright, and for an additional highlight on this, what we need is actually a yellow. So you don't want to use white. If you mix white with red, what you're going to get is pink. To highlight red, most of the time, what you're going to do is use a yellow. And in this case, we're actually going to use a sand yellow, something that's not super duper crazy bright. So I'm going to pull some of my Mephiston down and pull a little bit of my sand yellow. And you know, looking at that now, I don't actually like that. That comes out very pink. So I'm going to go with a tried and true here. We're going to go and grab up some flash glitz. Now, so I was thinking that sand, that it's a little too pale. So we're going to grab some flash glitz here. This has always been a bit more of a pure pigment, and that is probably why that sand has just a little bit too much white, so it brings out the pink in it, which is not what I want. All right, so wipe this out, go from my dirty water to my clean water, grab some of my Mephiston here and bring it down, and what we're gonna get is an orange. Add a little bit more, add a little bit more. All right, and now we have an orange that we can work with. Just highlight the very edges with this. Wipe some of that off. And we're going to use mostly the edge of our brush here. Coming along this top area. Bringing this along this edge. Same thing here. All right, we're going to pull a little more of our yellow in. A little more of an orange here. For on this, our final highlight, I'm going to go ahead and wash this out really well. Go to my clean water here, and I'm actually going to use my edge highlighting brush here, my old WizKids multi-purpose. I'm going to pick up some of this orange that we just made, wipe out some of it, And then come in for final highlights here. This is going to help these edges really stand out. Too much. Bring that back in. And we can treat this hair almost like a cylinder right here. And so because of that, we're actually going to take just a touch of this white. We're going to be able to come in and hit this area here. Like that. Alrighty. So, this gives you a good idea about where this whole thing is going. You can see how kind of labor intensive this kind of painting is, where you have lots and lots of layers, you have different techniques of stippling, you have different brushes you're changing out. This is just what it takes if you want these kind of centerpiece models to look really nice. You can get a lot done with airbrushing, you can do a lot with rattle cans, but ultimately when it comes down to it, if you want a particular aesthetic, you'll have to spend the time to get it there. And so now you can see where this is going. This whole thing is going to be finished in much the same way as this top area here. He has to have his face worked on. These skulls right here need to be painted. There's spheres, so we're going to highlight them like we would a sphere. A lot of the work has been done in here, which is fine. This has been made gray, these have. And so we're just going to continue to work in much the same manner. And next time when we come back, we're going to be working on his... Actually, we might have been done entirely with him. We'll probably be working on these faces. So these are the three heads. The Korn, Zinch, and Nurgle heads for the guy that we have kind of already going. So those should go a little bit faster. They have a little bit less detail than Archaon, but this is definitely where we want to spend our time. We definitely want to be making this guy look the best that we can. So thank you for joining me today on the Modern Explorers Guild Workbench. I am Drew, and I hope to see you here next time.